It's that time again. We're back for episode 3 of the Future of Marketing Live series. There may be a few of you old enough to remember Bob Hoskins saying it's good to talk in a TV ad for BT. If there are 2 people that prove that to be true, then we've got them here tonight. The subject of tonight's conversation is you are not your customer, which according to Mark Ritson is the first rule of marketing. We'll be talking about how as marketers we can ensure we keep a focus on the customer when looking at the strategies we develop and the tactics we employ. A key part of this is making sure the organisations we inhabit do the same. It's a discussion that will talk about research, keeping communication channels open, and we'll also delve into the world of UX design. Before we start, I'm reminded of a favourite phrase of one of the best sales directors I've ever worked with. You have 2 eyes, 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that proportion. Let's go inside and meet our guests. Okay, so welcome along to the episode 3 of the Future of Marketing Live series. As I mentioned in the pre-roll there, we've got 2 guests who like to talk, so hopefully we'll keep it within the limits of the event. Let me introduce you to who we've got. So first of all, on my left here we have Andi Jarvis, founder of Eximo Marketing Strategy, event host and general fountain of marketing knowledge. Apparently you told me to say that. And on my right-hand side, we have Gareth Dunlop here, who Gareth was the founder of a UX agency in Belfast called Fathom. And Gareth may not remember this, but I first came across Gareth it was the late 20th century, I think, when he was the managing director of a web agency. That when I embarked on my first ever website project as an in-house marketer, we commissioned to do a bit of work. So that's how old both of us are. So I suppose, I mean, just leading on from that and in line with the theme, I suppose, of you are not your customer, it might sound like a simple enough question, but it's one I'm sure you've been asked lots. Can you tell us what is UX design?
It's a good question, Peter, and normally I'm the person asking the question because it's normally an interview and some other poor soul has to answer. So I'll put myself in their shoes and I'll give you the most succinct answer I can. UX design is a subset of a discipline called experience design. And experience design has come to prominence over the last number of decades because there's an increasing awareness that design is more than one thing, that design encompasses everything that makes up how we feel at a moment in time. So if you take things that are common to us, like going to a new city or going to a restaurant or going to a hotel, how we feel about that city or that restaurant or that hotel is made up of lots and lots of small things. So we can go to a city and it might have these beautiful monuments, but if the hotel's crap, then we're going to remember the crap hotel as well as the beautiful monuments. Or if the city's beautiful and the wine is fabulous and the food is to die for, but the locals are rude, we're going to remember the locals being rude. So experience design is this idea that when we're recalling or encountering something that's happened to us, we remember all the detail. And experience design just tries to encourage us to think about all of the detail, the big stuff and the small stuff, all of which makes up that experience or that memory. So UX design is the application of experience design specifically for digital products and services. So when we are building an app or we're building a website, UX design involves the fact that it's got to work well, it's got to look good, and it's got to feel good. So what it's referring to is the website or the app in its totality. So UX design in its simplest terms is how the designer treats the user. It's how it feels to be a user is what UX design is.
Okay, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned there, the examples you give are all offline, not digital examples, because they're the experiences that I suppose people will be most familiar with. When I first came across, somebody suggested that it might be a good idea as part of a web project to do a UX research piece at the start of that project. My initial reaction was I was terrified because I was like, oh no, but I'm not a techie. There's no way I can understand this. It was only after I engaged with the process with Fathom that you realise that actually it's not just about digital things. It's about our the experiences that we have with everything that we buy, whether it's online or offline. It's just the experiences we have, whether it's a purchasing experience or not. So I suppose that takes me on to, given your work with your customers on the market and strategy side, can you tell us, Andy, how you take that UX design process offline, if you like, in your initial discussions with them around trying to frame the strategy and work out what the objectives are and then deciding how they're going to go and achieve them?
I think the thing, having seen Gareth speak about UX design several times, that comes through, although he never actually mentioned it, I think, in that introduction, was it about looking at it through the eyes of the customer, and it's about taking it away from what you think and hearing more about what they think. And to me, that's what I do in marketing, and that's what I encourage everyone to do in marketing, is to be customer oriented. And it's easy when you're sat in your office talking to people who you work with and people who you sit next to all day, or the MD who's built the product or whatever it is, and everyone thinks that the thing's brilliant. And you just get carried away in that product focus and forget to actually talk to the people at the other side of it who are going to be using it, who are going to be buying it, who are going to be gifting it, or whatever it is they're going to do with it. So for me, marketing starts there with the customer, and you've got to understand them. And that's the starting point of almost everything I do with clients, is let's bring that voice of the customer into the room, hear what they have to say, hear what they feel and think and do with the product, rather than just, this is what we think you should do, but bringing them in and understanding what they actually do with it, and what do they call it, and what language do they use, and when are they emotive about it, and when are they happy with it, and even just what do they do with it? How many products have you seen that have been built for one thing, and then you go somewhere and you see people using it for something entirely differently? You've got to understand that, and you do that by bringing the voice of the customer into the room.
Okay, and what happens, I suppose, when organizations don't do either proper UX or proper customer research at the start of a project and just go on and design for personal preferences and opinions? What's the ultimate consequence of that?
You see, I don't know what the figure is, but if you look at the successful launch of new products, I think he's down in single digits. It's like 9% or maybe 12%, something gets quoted, but it's not a massive figure. Whatever the figure is, it's never huge. I think that's what happens when you spend a lot of time looking at what you think is good and not listening to the customers, understanding their problems and their concerns. And you often hear, when you talk to people who are really product oriented and really internally focused, you hear them quote, Steve Jobs didn't believe in market research, therefore it's not worth doing. Or Henry Ford gets rolled out. If I'd have asked the customers what they wanted, they'd have asked for a faster horse. And those bits are true. And maybe you can't use market research to come up with kind of massive jumps forward. But what you can do is use market research to understand customer problems.
Does that come back to listening to customers isn't necessarily doing what they ask? It's listening more deeply than that to what they actually want. Mm-hmm. So it's not just asking, what do you want a website to look like? It's understanding more about what their real problems are, what they're trying to achieve, and then using your expertise and knowledge from internal organizations, of which there is a lot, to take what you've learned from listening well, and not just doing what people ask you to do, but coming up with a design that allows people to do the thing that they want to do quickly and easy.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there, Peter, which I think are worth unwrapping. To Andy's point, the Henry Ford quote and the Steve Jobs quote would come up regularly in our work. And the way that we would see that is Jobs is correct when he says that customers don't necessarily know what they want until they see it. Henry Ford is correct when he says if we'd spoken to their customers about what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. Now, what both of those quotes miss or misinterpret is that the type of customer research that they are talking about is not where you ask the customer for the solution. That type of research is always trying to explore the problem. It is always your job to innovate. It's always your job to do the hard bit. Of course, Henry Ford's customers weren't going to say, do you know what, there's been fabulous advances in the combustion engine and there's a network of canal tracks that run alongside canals. Why don't we get an engine instead of a horse? Of course they're not going to do that. That's his engineer's job. But where you do check in with your customer is when you move away from the problem piece, where you research in the traditional way, and you move into the solution piece, you do develop solutions in line with your customers. So if we can stick with Steve Jobs, and iPhones don't have buttons anymore, but the early iPhones did have buttons. And Apple famously tested 120 combination of button widths, materials, and levels of firmness, because they wanted the users of those first phones, when they pressed that button, they wanted that product to feel usable, solid, reliable. So they tested 120 solutions. So if someone says, Steve Jobs just come up and went, here's the end product, that's just not the case. He understood customers well enough to innovate, but he kept himself close to customers during that innovation process, so that by the time he launched that product, he knew that the dimensions and the firmness and the materials of that button were exactly what his customers wanted. So he was leaving none of that to chance. He was designing that to the nth degree. And for me, that's the beauty of it. You ask customers questions to understand the problem, but you then research their behaviours around the solutions that you're trying out, in the knowledge that some of your ideas will be brilliant and your customers will love them, and many of your ideas will be poor and your customers will reject them. But that's the beauty of the process.
Okay. Ted Levitt, back in the 50s, I think it was, people don't want a 3/4 inch drill bit, they want a 3/4 inch hole. And whatever the quote was, I think I'm close enough with it anyway. But that was in the 50s, talking about being customer oriented and looking at, they have a problem, what's your solution? And Jobs to Be Done came out of that with Clayton Christensen, I think, from Harvard. And that form of research and actually looking at what is the problem the customer needs solving. It's your job to solve it, but you need to find out what the problem is. So when people ask bad questions, funnily enough, you get bad answers, right? You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. That's what happens. So bad research takes you into bad areas and bad things, but actually asking good questions, hearing problems, gives you the opportunity to come up with solutions.
Okay. One of the biggest challenges, I know that I faced when I was sold on the UX process, for example, was getting the internal buy-in for it. The famous line that I'm sure lots of people have heard, we don't need to ask our customers what they want. We know our customers better than anybody. So what do we need to go and invest in that research for, or spend that money on that UX process for? How can somebody in an in-house marketing role go about getting for the process?
Great question, Peter, and it's one that's on my mind regularly, because when I'm not doing stuff like this, most of my time at Fathom is spent selling. And so selling is specifically about that very challenge, encouraging people that this is worth the return on investment. I think there's two places I always go. One is hard statistics and one is softer human stories. So on the hard statistics, I go after the data. And that typically is helping organizations understand the price of bad experience and the opportunity of good experience. One of the great things about selling user experience in a digital world is that every time you look at a digital winner, they have embedded UX into the heart of the organization. So if you look at everything from sport to news to travel to dating to social networks, every one that wins has this baked in. So as we go is we get after the data to begin to help people understand this in language that they understand. And it's not always the case, but where we have clients who have invested historically in data, we can often join the dots from the ones and zeros to commercial numbers, which all of a sudden makes the language of UX understandable to the board. So first thing I would say is invest in the data. But the second thing is get your hands on human stories. So we would often, not always, but often during the sales process, we would, at our own risk and cost, carry out some usability testing on websites and apps. So when we're in the boardroom trying to persuade the board to invest with UX, we show them some clips of their customers trying to use their product. And so for many of these people, this is the first time they have any sense of how they're treating their customers through their digital channels. They've never seen this stuff before. They just kind of think it's going okay. And it can be a real wake up call. I remember one situation. There was a particular board, and they had a website that was a public service delivery website, and they were very proud of some of the data and numbers that come up. But we videoed a blind lady using the site using her screen reader, and it took her about 2.5 minutes to find the information that she wanted on a particular screen, because the screen hadn't been developed to be accessible. And we took the decision before we went in that we wouldn't edit that clip. We would sit through the 2.5 minutes of pain, and we put on the clip, and we just watched, and we could just feel the temperature in the room go up and up and up and up. But we just felt it was our job to let folks see what it was like to be a user or a customer of that organisation, you know. And we don't do that with any conceit or self-righteousness. It's as people get more senior in their roles and take on more responsibility, they just tend to move further and further away from the customer. And so we find that video and usability videos in particular are just a fabulous way of bringing the customer into the room. So data and video are the two places we go to try and persuade.
Are there any specific things that you do with your customers if there's an initial reticence to go down, to go deep enough within the sort of research stage?
Gareth's stolen all the best answers there. Because whenever you can bring the voice of the customer into the room, you tend to be on the winning side. And you're right. Just by nature, isn't it? As you go senior in the organisation, you're not at the coalface anymore, and that's true in almost every organisation. The other way you can pick it up easily and cheaply sometimes is social media comments. I'm still amazed by the number of companies who think that social media comments about their brand only exist if they've been tagged in them. A great way sometimes to get senior people on side is just to search for your brand name in various social media elements and pull up what people are saying about you. It doesn't work too much sometimes in quite boring B2B industries, but if you've got anything consumer related, you'll probably find there's a whole stream of stuff out there being spoken about you. Most of it not particularly nicely about you. And if you can bring that and go, look, these are the problems we're having, this is why we need to bring the voice of the customer in the room. Because senior team are probably talking to, depending on the organisation, but certainly say in big B2B, the senior team are probably talking to their key accounts. They may be pushing millions through that business, and they're happy because they keep doing business with you and you keep taking them away and going to trade shows with them. So they think the customers are all happy. But that's 20% of your business bringing 80% of your revenue. You've got to keep them happy. What about the other 80% of the customers that you're not speaking to regularly? How would you bring that voice into the room? And that is relatively straightforward for in-house marketers to do, to tap into what people are saying about them and start to push that up. But start early as well. If you are waiting until you're pitching for budget to start bringing the voice of the customer in, I think you're probably a bit late. I would, Gareth said, get the data as soon as you can. Absolutely. Start bringing that in. As soon as you get in the job, start finding out what the customers are saying and pushing it up.
Okay. I have an anecdote, if I may, Peter. Keep me right if I'm going to run over time. We a couple of years ago, we were commissioned to do one of those briefs that you kind of dream of when you're a UX agency. It was from one of the big four banks in Ireland, and they said, we would like our digital mortgage experience to be the best of any bank on the island. We don't need you to build a business case. We don't need to tell you why we need UX. We just want this thing. Tell us how we're going to go about doing it. So it's just one of those briefs that you die for. So that was fine. We get stuck into the project. We agreed the process with the client, and we identified that there were 6 types of mortgage applicants, from first-time owners to switchers to movers to second home and all the rest. Now that's not new. Anyone involved in selling mortgages will classify their customers into 5 or 6. But as the project proceeded, we felt that there was a bit of pressure coming in from a visual design and creative perspective. There was a bit of pressure coming in around what we would have considered to be moving into cliched communications. So, and the most cliched communications, as I'm sure we've all seen the adverts, it's the young couple painting the room with the boxes on the floor. There may be a baby in the way.
Pizza and a glass of Prosecco, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm doing them a terrible disservice to suggest that they were taking us there, but we were moving closer in that direction than we would have liked. We were very aware that Ireland was just coming out of one of the biggest recessions in the history of the state. Trust in Irish banks was at an all-time low. All the research from Irish consumer mortgage sentiment was telling us there was a big job of work to be done in terms of regaining customer trust. And the research was telling us critically, and this was our little golden thread, the research was telling us that people start thinking about a mortgage 7 years before they first apply. So there's this 7 years of experience that if you can in any way add value, you're putting yourself in pole position over here. So that's all fine. So we were feeling really quite good about the research. The great thing about research usually is it gives you direction. And when it gives you direction, you can have the courage of your convictions to follow where it takes you. So far, so good. But we were feeling this pressure to move into more cliched areas that we weren't comfortable with. And when you're an agency, there's a constant pressure to give the customer what they want. And you push as hard as you could or should, but there comes a day from time to time you go, do you know what? They're paying the money, we're going to give them the thing that they want. But we decided we would have one final roll of the dice to resist some of that direction. So what we did was we went back to 2 pieces of primary research, which we had done. We interviewed 3 sets of people across, we carried out 18 interviews, 3 sets of people times the 6 categories of mortgage applicant. And in the first time homeowners, we interviewed 2 couples. Both interviews were highly emotional because of the stress of trying to get a mortgage and to buy a house in Dublin. And in one interview, one of the people in the couple broke down as they were talking about, in tears, as they were talking about the stress that trying to get a house was putting on their relationship. Their weekends were, on a Saturday morning, he would go to a blind auction, she would go to a blind auction, they would keep in touch via text message, they would try and, outbid, and they would come home empty-handed every single Saturday, week after week after week. So this was just putting an unbearable strain on the relationship. And as I say, as they told their story, one of them broke down. So when it came to the crunch meeting, it was a big meeting. There was maybe 12 from the client and 3 from us. It was more heightened than it maybe needed to be, but that's where we had ended up. We decided we would just play the primary research, and that's exactly what we did. We played the primary research, and we basically said we can't do it to these folks. If we want to be what we say we are, the best mortgage experience on the island, then we owe it to them and we owe it to the research to answer their questions, to help them along, and to get away from the old marketing ways, if you like. And folks went, okay, let's do it. So sometimes that primary research and bringing that customer into the room kind of a transformative effect in terms of making good design decisions.
That requires a degree of bravery and confidence to do that, because as you said, very often you can just bail on a decision like that and say, you know what, give them what they want, get paid and get out of here.
That's why you bring in good agencies like Fathom,
well,
because they know what they're doing and they have the confidence in their abilities to do that, and that's why sometimes you've got to have the humbleness as manager to go, do you know what, I'm marketing manager, I can't do this on my own. I've got to bring in people who know what they're doing and pay the cost to do it.
But as a key skill then of the internal marketing person to maintain the discipline, to be that connection between the internal voices, the voice of the customer, and you try and somehow to be a go-between and make sure that the best intentions and the best results can be achieved by ensuring that essentially everybody gets what they need out of this. But I suppose it goes back to some of the research has been done about the best performing sales teams, and you have your relationship builders at one end of the spectrum right through to your challengers at the other. And in most cases, the challengers are the ones that end up doing best, particularly in a B2B environment, because they're the ones that earn the trust of the customer to say, right back to your point, Andy, you know what, these guys know their stuff, so they're filling a gap that we don't have, and we're invested in a process, and we've just got to now let it grow. But as an internal marketing person, do you think it's important that is it's a skill that's not taught, but an important skill to say, no, we've made a decision here that this is what we're going to do. We're going to invest in this research. It's going to inform our decisions. We're not going to let any of the personal opinions and subjectiveness creep back into the process, because it'll run the risk of ruining the work that we've done previously.
I think there's a little bit that actually the role of a marketer changes depending on the size of the firm you work in and seniority within that firm as well. But what I see a lot of the time, generally speaking, is that in smaller firms, marketers are hands-on jacks of all trades who do a lot of stuff. So that what you're describing there is probably true. I think when I work with bigger firms, sort of brands that you'd know of, and enterprise level companies like that, where actually 85% of the job of being a semi-senior head of or a senior trader or whatever there is about managing those agency relationships. You're not designing the poster yourself. You're having to brief an agency, and then the skill is getting out of the way and you've either got to pick the right people and trust them, and if you trust them, get out of the way and let them do the job, and then be able to influence that as it comes through. So I think Marketing jobs are slightly different depending on the size of organisation you're working in. But if it's a smaller company and you're expected to be doing everything, you've almost got to sell, well, why should we spend external money because we're paying you? And that's, again, a different skill altogether, but still an important thing to be able to do.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is just to agree that when I think about the responsibilities that we have as an agency, our ability to do our work certainly is impacted by the quality of the person that we engage with, and if we have an informed, switched on, humble enough to listen, assertive enough to challenge type individual, we can do great things.
Okay, I mean, because your point about Mark Ritson's been mentioned once or twice already tonight, but he had an article there in Marketing Week a few weeks ago where he talked about the most important time in any marketer's job is that first 100 days. And the key thing there is to build that sort of tailwind of trust almost with the senior people in the organisation. So rather than getting immediately bogged down in a lot of tactical activity, that you're now looking after the social channels and you're using Canva to design all this stuff and you're just really, really busy, and that's good because we feel like we're getting our money's worth now. How can given our audience for this series is designed to help marketing students and those who've recently graduated. So given where we are now, we've had a lot of graduates there in June and July. People will be going out and looking for their first marketing roles or will have just secured them. What sort of activities can they undertake in that first 100 days in the job to help build that tailwind of trust that Ritson talked about with the senior people in the organisation, so that they have the credibility and the authority to go and suggest directions of travel, if you like, that are then going to be listened to?
Ask questions about money. Every board presentation I've seen, every board presentation made, the first thing almost any board wants to know is how much money have we made, or plan to make, or how many units have we sold, or something along that line. And most marketers are more interested in talking about metrics that about website visits or impressions or this, that and the other. And the easiest way to lose any trust that you're building is to talk about something like that first. So to me, get comfortable, find out what matters to the people in the big important jobs in the organisation. Talk to the woman in charge and go, right, what's important here? What is it? What do you look at? What are the dashboard things on your dashboard? Great, okay. Take that away and work out how what you do can inform that. If it's a good organisation, they'll probably tell you that. But if they don't, work it out. And then start talking in those terms. We've done this, which will help that. Or to help this, we've done these things. And that starts to build trust that you're trying to help move, the levers of that organisation. As soon as you start walking in and going, oh, we've, cut our CPC, or we've increased our, traffic to the website by X or Y, it's like, brilliant. How many more units have we sold this month? Let me just find that. Bye-bye trust. It's gone. Okay. So to me, it in most organisations, charities, maybe public sector, you might argue slightly differently, but there's always commercial objectives. Find out what they are and build everything off them.
And is it similar, I suppose, to whenever you're going to any sales negotiation, Gareth, the most important person you need to identify is the biggest objector? I think the biggest objector and the person of the most influence, and trying to understand what they want and making sure that what you're proposing is going to help them.
Yeah, I think so, Peter. I love talking about sales, and I've got endless opinions on it, unsurprisingly. I'll wait until I close 100% of all deals before I get too self-righteous or pretend I know it all. But
I'll buy that course when you do.
Yeah. But certainly I think as you get older, you realise that the thing that most people want around the table isn't the thing you're selling. They want the consequence or the cause of what you bring. And I think you just get better at understanding that the CFO might have different needs than the CEO, than the CTO, so different people have different needs. And you got to make sure that before you leave the room that everyone feels, oh yeah, that guy spoke to me, that guy, there's something, he's considered my concerns around this and he's addressed them. So I hope one gets better to go back to Andy's point, you get better at speaking in a language that is much more familiar to them and much less familiar to me in the world of bits and bytes and ones and zeros.
It connects up. I saw a post on LinkedIn again a few months ago where someone said, life's too short to work for a CEO that doesn't get marketing, and might sound surprising to say this, but as somebody that's worked in marketing now for almost a quarter of a century, that I don't like that attitude, to be honest, because I think it's a bit of an abdication of responsibility, in the sense that it's not necessarily the CEO's job to get it. It's your job to convince them of the value of it.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I would interpret that is life's too short to tolerate marketers who don't try to work out the pressures that a CEO feels. That's the way that quote should be should be put, Yeah. And it's like when you make your living from design or from communications, and we make our living from design, it's very easy to get self-righteous about it and look at the mistakes those guys made and how can they be so stupid. But when you recognise the pressures that the folks at the top have and the competing pressures for budget and for their time and their attention and their energy, they can't give it to everything. And it's very, very difficult for those folks to be able to get every single decision right. So I would certainly say it's easy to be self-righteous. It's easy to look at the man or the woman at the top and wonder how such a clown got in such a position. But the truth is, to go back to Andy's point, we can certainly work harder to talk in their language, speak in terminology that's more familiar to them than it is to us. Spend time understanding what are their problems and how does the bit that I'm responsible for, marketing, contribute to solving some of those problems. I think we can work
Does that
harder.
come down to understanding the language of the boardroom better? And because I remember the thing we did before, Andy, there was a throwaway line you said on it, marketers are over here talking about all these things, and meanwhile, but the line I think you said was, meanwhile, all the grown-ups in the boardroom are, and is that, I mean, that's a very real presentation of the perception of marketing in an awful lot of organisations.
So it's that quote to me, and I think Gareth improved it much better than I'm about to do, but to me that quote says something like, life's too short to work for a CEO who doesn't get marketing tactics. Because I've never met a CEO who doesn't understand marketing strategy. Who are we targeting? What they're going to buy from us? What are our objectives? I've met loads of CEOs who don't have the first idea what SEO is, how to do Facebook ads, what the point of social media is, and lots of other things, and does TV work for their brand? I've met loads of those. But when you talk to CEOs about what are the objectives for the year and who are you targeting and why should people buy their product, most of them know all of that. So are you talking about a CEO who doesn't know marketing tactics? You're like, well, that's the thing. That's your job, right? Your job is to do that thing. So for me, marketers, and again, I think there's maybe a big and a small company thing going on. And when I was younger, I dodged going to work for a big company. I didn't want to. I didn't like it. I liked working in small, medium companies where you could do lots of things. I look back now and think I wish I'd have gone to work for a big company with thousands of people because I'd have had to learn different things. And I look at that and I think certainly in smaller companies, marketers are much more the colouring in department. In bigger companies, you don't see it as much. They actually, you have to be very commercial and you have to do very, very useful things that deliver results. But this perception of marketers being the colouring in department or the children and the grown-ups are in the boardroom is hard to shake because marketers get thrown into tactics, love tactics, do this brilliantly, and then start wondering why they're not getting promoted or why the finance person takes over as CEO and the marketing person doesn't. Because they've spent the whole time with the crayons, that's why. And I think maybe there's like a big company, small company distinction there a little bit. But I think that's why I refer to the board often as the grown-ups rather than the marketers, because it just feels that way a lot of the time.
I want to go back to one of the articles you wrote on LinkedIn there recently, Gareth, about the often heard "it depends" answer. And I mean, I'm sure it's a familiar phrase for anybody working in with an agency on any digital solution, whether it be an SEO solution or a UX solution or a design solution. And while there's no doubt in most cases it's a perfectly logical answer, because it definitely does depend, I never felt like it moved the conversation on. I mean, where do you go with that? Whenever you, as a marketer, you ask a question, what should we do here? And the answer is, it depends. And then you're waiting for it depends to be elaborated on, and nothing comes back to you. And you're thinking, so should I mean, it was the point of the topic of your article, really. How can people in the agency world who might be occasionally use the "it depends" answer, how can they improve that answer to actually make it move the conversation on a little bit?
Yeah. I'll start with the positive. So the phrase or the response "it depends" comes from a good place. It comes from a place whereby designers in particular, I won't speak for Mark, I'll stick in my home turf of designers. Designers in particular don't want to give easy or lazy or off the bat answers to difficult questions. And I would almost go a step further, because for me, I think "it depends" is a recognition of the fact that one of the challenges about design principles is that no sooner have you stated it as this inalienable, objective, universal truth than someone gives you this exception that you hadn't thought about, and you realise, oh, hadn't thought about that. So "it depends" is a realisation that you just got to be careful about, nailing your colours to the mast too early. As I put in the blog article, I think there's a number of things that we can and should do to move the conversation on. One of my favourite ones actually is a discipline called casuistry, which comes from a moral philosophy and religious background. This is getting unnecessarily deep. We need to have red wine in our hands or something if we're going to tackle this one. And what it's about is it's saying when it comes to making moral judgments, you've got two choices. You can either come up with this grand principle which you apply to all of humankind for all of time, or you can say, do you know what? Culture changes, time and place changes, society changes. Perhaps there's a more subtle or nuanced way in which we can explore this moral question. And casuistry is the discipline that says we're going to do it this nuanced way rather than this broad brush way. So what casuistry is really helpful about in the context of design is to say, these design challenges that we are facing, what other design challenges are they most like? And what good outcomes can we see from other similar design challenges? Because if we can find design challenges that look or feel quite like this one, and we can see the outcomes, good and bad, from other similar ones, that might give us some guidance. When we're responding to "it depends," the responsibility of the designer is to get everyone involved in the decision-making process to a situation where they can make the best decision possible based on what is known. So you're never going to have all the facts, but in framing how you come to that decision, you can say, let's agree what data and insight we're going to amass, let's determine how we're going to make the decision, and then let's go and get ourselves the ingredients, put them through that decision-making process, and come up with a solution. So we find casuistry very helpful. We find the addition of research very helpful, self-evidently, and then we find prioritization exercises and group voting type exercises a very helpful way to bring experience in the room there. So for me, the key is just making sure that, having identified that you don't want to rush to an easy answer, you give the client, or you give the decision maker the tools they need to get there.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. You mentioned about group voting there, which I found fascinating, because sometimes with
LinkedIn polls.
No, it's nothing like LinkedIn polls. Hopefully not. But is there ever a point where going with the crowd is not the right thing to do? So do you use them judiciously, because obviously sometimes the way they ask the question can frame the outcome of where the hands go up. So when do you use them?
Yeah, I'll use your word judiciously. Yeah, very, very, very carefully. Our favourite prioritisation technique, when we've got the insight and we've got potential solutions, one of our favourite prioritisation techniques is where each idea is marked against 4 criteria: technical feasibility, design feasibility, impact on user, impact on business. And there's a few and each of those is graded out of 5, and then each of them gets a total, and then you have to calibrate them all to bring them into the median. So there's all sorts of nice little techniques that really forces you to prioritize your ideas and take them forward to be tested or further researched. So that would be our favourite one by a distance. Sometimes dot voting works okay, depending on what the challenge is, but there are sort of research-led voting techniques like Roman voting and similar, which means that you do vote, the opinions of the room are reflected in the outcomes, but that's infused or calibrated by some research findings as well. So there's different techniques that you can use. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you very much. No further questions, John.
Okay. I mean, this is one, Gareth, that we talked about before you came along, and it's a question for both of you really. But I mean, how start with the UX focus. But I mean, how do you rate the overall standard of UX across digital products, websites, apps, internets? Better than it was, getting worse?
It is. I think its diversity is greater than ever. I think there's some exceptional digital experiences, and I think there are some that are as bad as ever. I know a guy who set up a UX agency in 2000, and fair play to him, because I'm not even sure I'd heard the term in 2000. But he came back from Australia. He was wanting to do something, and he thought, I'll do a bit of UX consultancy for 6 months until web design catches up. And when web design catches up, well, then I'll go and do something else. So it's now 21 years later, and he runs a business of 50 people dedicated solely to UX. Web design hasn't caught up, and I think that tells its own story. I mean, we're still making unacceptable mistakes. We're still making appalling design decisions based on the personal preferences of people who cannot and do not represent their users. We don't need to go into specific design techniques, or I will be here all night. But regularly on websites, we see techniques that have been long since discredited as being conversion killers, as being usability blockers, as being slow to download, penalising in any number of ways. But because they look better and they're beautiful in the shiny 85-inch boardroom plasma, they get signed off. And
You're talking about video on homepages, aren't you?
That's one of a number of bet wires that I personally have. And I just
every other page, obviously, video is fine.
Well, it's autoplay background video in particular is my bet wire. So there's just too many bad design decisions being made. And one of the few benefits of making your living from UX is that when you come across a bad website, you have a little pressure release valve, because you take a screenshot of it and you put it in your folder called "Use at the next presentation you give." And
At least we didn't build this.
It's true. But I honestly, I'd say most weeks, there's rarely a week I would take less than 10 screenshots, fewer than 10 screenshots. Yeah,
right.
Just simple stuff all the time that could and should just be better.
But I personally think from my own experience, the exposure to digital journeys, I feel like, through the apps and the websites and stuff that we use, has made me probably even more critical of the physical environments that I find myself in now, in the sense that one of the big challenges that you'll know, Gareth, facing like family-run B&Bs, for example, or small family hotels, is that because people are used to the Booking.com experience and the Airbnb experience, whenever these people are trying to design a digital solution, they expect the same functionality. They expect the experience to be as slick, and the differentiation, if you like, the great level in playing field that the internet was, I feel like, where the small guys can now compete with the big guys. Well, they can, if the budget's big enough to allow them to do the proper research and invest in the customer centric solution. Do you think that I suppose in physical environments influences how we react to offline experiences as well?
I suppose, just to jump back a little bit with that question, so it's always been thus in marketing. So 2003, I started working at Durham County Cricket Club. It's professional cricket in England, and I think maybe the year after, the governing body did some research about brand perceptions and things like that. And county cricket clubs in their local county, so Durham in Durham, Yorkshire in Yorkshire, and so on, were held in a similar esteem to places like Tesco. Now, we had, outside of the playing staff, about somewhere between 20 and 25 full-time staff, a couple of part-timers, and we got a load of temporary staff for big events, right? So, but customer service was expected to be on the same level as Tesco. Returns policy was expected to be on a similar sort of standard. Like, we're talking about one of the biggest employers in the country, a couple of 100,000 people, I imagine, working for them, and 22 folks trying to juggle holidays, working long hours, and this, that, and the other. So we had that problem then, just in a slightly different way. And I think what you're saying is that there was this equalising part, and then all of a sudden, now you've got the Booking.coms or whoever it is, these big aggregators who are seeing so much traffic coming through, they can run those great little micro tests. Well, if we change this from this to that colour or make it 3 pixels wider, what does it do? Compared to local business that might get 200 hits a month. And they can't run those tests. So that gap, that sort of bit where it was all squeezed together in that golden heyday, that did it ever exist, who knows, is now starting to widen apart again. But people do expect that they've booked on booking.com or they've bought through somewhere. They expect the service to match that. So, you know, and you get there and the check-in experience is, I keep talking about hotels, the check-in experience is awful and the telly's crap and, you know, well, the pictures don't match the pictures. And those things are all bits where actually, what is a brand? You know, it's a promise being made, and do you deliver on that promise? There's lots of different ways to describe it. That's maybe one of them. But you've got to deliver on the promise you're making. And sometimes you can set the bar really low and promise quite low. There was a time on TripAdvisor where the number one hotel in Dublin was like it was a dormitory, like a backpackers, 18 people in a room, and it was 5 out of 5 or 4.8 out of 5 for ages and ages. It was the number one ranked place to stay in Dublin. Why? Because it made you a really easy promise. We're clean, you get a free towel, and the showers are clean as well. And it delivered on it, and you got a free breakfast, and it was €12 a night or something. So it was always really, really well ranked. Now, what they were promising was entirely different to what the Shelbourne's promising, but you were paying more for that. So as long as you're delivering on the promise, I think that's the important thing. And that, to me, is where marketing has to come in. It's like, what's the promise we're making to customers? Are we delivering on it? And if you're involved in that as a marketer in one way or another, then I think you're in a good place to learn a lot there.
What are your, I suppose, you've been working in this area now for longer than you probably care to remember, but what is it you really enjoy about the work that you're doing with UX and with your customers in particular?
I think the most satisfying part is that UX done right doesn't just move the dial 10%. UX done right has a transformative impact on digital website performance. I'll resist. I promise you, I'll resist turning this into a sales pitch. But I'll give you straight down the camera. We were involved in all of the UX research that underpinned the redevelopment of the PSNI website in 2016. Non-urgent crime reporting online went up over 700% the day after the site was launched. So straight away, its availability, our understanding of what was stopping people using it, our recognition of what would persuade people to use it. Once we had that, we were able to build a persuasion design flow and experience around that. As you know, a couple of very quick sort of amusing examples. The major blocker for not using 101, not phoning 101, was that it wasn't free, and 999 was. So there's a bit of research. And the second piece of research which helped us design the flow was that the single most common cause of 101 calls was petrol pump drive-offs. And the frustration around petrol pump drive-offs was that in over 50% of cases, by the time the cops got to the person who'd done it, they had gone, oh, I forgot to pay for my petrol. They had been back and paid it by the time the cops got there. So there's all this efficiency you can bring. And what's the magic bullet here? It's not us being clever designers. It's the research telling us what users need. You know, we redesigned the onboarding flow for a virtual mobile network that's owned by 3 in Dublin called 48. Again, on the morning that the first phase launched, the number of inbound inquiries reduced by 2/3 to 33% of what it used to be, simply by answering users' questions as a result of the flow. How do we know what the users' questions were? We spent time with them. We researched them. We knew what the questions were because we'd been in the room with users as they moved through the flow. And again, the beauty for me is that it's not because we're brilliant designers. It's just because we stopped for a minute and listened to the customer. And we knew their concerns, their questions, their blockers, their persuaders, and we were able to bake that into the design.
Does that go back? I mean, I mentioned a little bit in the intro to this about one of the best sales directors I ever worked for, and he used this line weekly, I think, with our sales team, that, you've got 2 eyes, 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that proportion. And it's just it's something that sticks with you, and it's a very good lesson for anybody doing, whether you're selling or whether you're designing or whether, eyes and ears open and mouth closed for a lot of the time is a good way to get to the crux of the problem. For you, Andy, similar sort of question, I suppose. Whenever you're engage with a customer to come in because they've got a problem and they don't know what direction they need to travel. What's your favorite bit of that explore process? I feel like when you start to see, my mum was a teacher, and I always remember one of the things she said, the reason why she was a teacher was for the light bulb moments. You know, when you look around the classroom and you see we've just made an impact there. What's your favorite part of the work that you do that gives that when you see that happening?
I think one of the things I wouldn't say I won't work with a company that won't let me talk to whoever I want in their organisation, but it's one of the red flags I have really early on that'll make me triple my price before it. No, I'm joking. But when you go into some companies and some organisations, they want this to be you're brought in by someone senior in marketing, and they want it to be a senior discussion with the senior people and all the high-powered people in the room sit around and discuss what the solution's going to be. One of the first things I want to do in any organisation is talk to people who talk to the customers. Depending on the size, it's people in customers. So usually some of the lowest paid people in the organisation, hourly paid staff, who sometimes temporary staff who are just in there a little bit. And you'd be amazed the number of times. You'd be amazed the number of times I get told, "What do you want to talk to them for?" Well, because before we start spending money on research, this is free research. I want to know what your customers are saying. And no, it's fine. We know our customers better than we tell them. Our sales director will tell you this, and he'll tell you. And you go, who deals with the returns? Oh, it's so and so down in that. You go, well, I'm going down there to talk to them, or we're going to bring them up and run a workshop with them. And that moment, usually that group sat in a room and like, well, no one ever talks to us. No one ever asks us. And it's like, you've got all the best information in the organisation, and no one's talking to you. Like, why do people send sales team have told us this is why people buy our product? And like, does anyone ever say that to you? No. What do people tell you? Oh, we buy it because it's cheap. Great. Okay. And you hear all this stuff. Or why do people send it back? Oh, it said it would do X and it doesn't. It does Y. And you hear all this information and then you present that back. And that is often the way I get the budget to be able to run some of the research, because they have, I don't want to spend it. We can tell you what it is. But you start to bring that information in. And I love that where people go, well, no one ever asks us a question. And then by the end of it, you're like, you are the most powerful people in this organisation. This needs to flow regularly back up to the board. And in one organisation, it did change a process where there's now a monthly report goes through from customer service back up about returns. You're like, why was that not a thing anyway? But it is now. So like those moments are brilliant.
I mean, I always felt, and I remember having conversations with my boss in several places before, that the main role of marketing was to try and make sure that the voice of the customer was heard within the organisation. That can make you a bit of an outlier sometimes, because maybe it's the way I ask the questions, but again, another it's back to that question of why are we doing this? Do you find that organisations maybe get hung up on what they want to do rather than fully understanding?
I don't know about you, Gareth. I can probably count on maybe both hands. Yeah, probably both hands. The number of organisations I've worked in the last couple of years where marketing is the function that brings the voice of the customer into the room.
Okay.
A lot of marketing teams have become, in B2B particularly, I've done a lot over the last couple of years, marketing is sales support, which it's not to look down my nose at that. It's a really important role, but that's all they think marketing can do is support the sales function. They are delivery. They are technical in some places. They run design teams in other places. A very limited number where they're actually actively the ones responsible for bringing the voice of the customer into the room before something goes wrong. Sometimes when something breaks and it's like, right, you sort this out. What are the customers saying? Yeah, that. But actually where it's generally just everyday part of the process, it's a very small number I've worked with. I might just be working with the wrong teams. I don't know. But it's not something I come across every day where you open the door in the marketing team and they're going, we regularly run this and we have these workshops with clients and we have a monthly thing and we get this scoring and we look at that and we improve. Great. I love it when you do, but it's a small number over the years. Last couple of years I've worked.
So for somebody going into a new organisation and trying to make an impact, what are there some simple things they could do from the get-go to to start that process off, back to I suppose the earlier question about the tailwind of trust thing, are there a few simple things they could do to try, and if they see that that's not happening, to try and bring that in and demonstrate the value of doing that a little bit more?
I'll let you go first. I'll give you. I've got a couple of examples, but you go first.
Well, I've a couple of responses as well, but I'll give you my favourite one, which isn't mine, but which I was delivering some training a couple of weeks ago for a bank, doing it remotely, and it was to a group of. I'm at an age now where I can call people in their early 20s youngsters, a group of fresh-faced youngsters who were starting out in their banking career in various parts of Asia. And and it was part of the induction, and I was second up. But the first person up was someone who worked for the bank, and their topic was that bank has recognised that the people within its organisation who are most free from bias and most free from assumptions are their fresh-faced kids just arriving in, who are just arriving in with none of this baggage. They're just doe-eyed, come in from university. So they have got programs set up specifically to allow those people in a consequence-free, guilt-free way to make suggestions or to observe stuff or to say stuff that otherwise wouldn't be said. And what they were saying to them was, look, the door is open. Please tell us these ridiculous assumptions and ways of working that we have that have just arrived. So I think for folks starting out, you've got this unique ability to see stuff that if your mind is telling you that's a bit weird or curious or silly, if you've got a relationship with a manager or someone who you can trust, just get a coffee and say, just notice that thing. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? So I think that's one. But I think as well as that, I think there's other good stuff. I think just build good networks, get a reputation early as somebody who's going to do what you say, and you're going to do it as you've said it and at the time you've said it. So just get a reputation for someone who just gets stuff done, can be trusted, and has stuff about them. And I think that'll earn you the right to ask some of those dopey questions, which may turn out not to be so dopey.
There's a bit about culture there as well, isn't there? That in some organisations, asking a stupid question is not valued, and in some organisations it is, and more of them should do that. But so you can just go, why do we do it this way? Because that question just opens up so much interesting stuff. But I suppose my examples would be, and if you're working in a small organisation, so you're a new marketer in Northern Ireland and you're going out and you're working in a small organisation, budgets are tight. And you can do this in any organisation, whether it's Amazon with multi-billion turnover or whether it's just down at the local solicitor's office and there's no money to do marketing. Get on the shop floor. Whether that's spending a day dealing with customer service or dealing with returns, or if it's a shop selling physical goods, if you're in B2B, go out with a sales team, get yourself on a trade counter. Listen to the language people use, listen to the problems they have, and listen to the customer that way. Don't believe the sales director, the product director, the managing director. Don't believe them. They'll be peddling you the bullshit they want you to believe. Not because it's bad, but because they've been there 6, 7, 8, 15 years. They're ingrained in the culture and they want to know. Get out and hear for the customer yourself. A friend of mine, a guy I know, he's the brand director at Dixon's Carphone, who run Couriers and PC World. Every year, the senior team have to go and spend a couple of days on the shop floor selling computers and TVs and dealing with customers and punching stuff in the till and stuff like that. Every year they have to do it so that they can understand what's going on in the retail environment. Get out from behind the desk and go and do it. It costs nothing to do. If you move up the scale a little bit and you've got a bit of budget, can you roll out something like Net Promoter Score, some annual customer surveys, or something that you can get that voice coming back in more frequently? But if there's no budget, just get out and talk to customers once a year, twice a year. Get on your feet and go and hear what they have to say.
And I suppose, wrapping up, it sort of shines a light for me on the there's never a black and white answer between is it an in-house marketing team or is it an agency. I've worked in in-house marketers and come under pressure from managing directors all my life to be, sure, why can't we just recruit that SEO specialist and that graphic designer and just do this all in-house? And the value has always been the external, the value of the external set of eyes to make you look a little bit closer at the pain sometimes that you put your customers through and say, why do you do that? And when the light gets shone on it, you sort of sit back. I've done this with CRM systems, with SEO, with UX. You're like, oh, do we really make people do that? and that's the value of that external relationship. So, so I mean, what is your opinion on the ongoing relationship, if you like, between in-house marketers and the agencies that they will inevitably need to support them?
I'll comment briefly, Peter, if I may. One of the curious things about the world of UX is that the marketplace is unrecognisable in 2021 versus 2011 when I started Fathom. There's been, even in Belfast, there's huge numbers of in-house UX teams working for big tech firms. So I think that's just a reflection of the fact that UX is now mainstream. 10 years ago, it was a nice to have for folks who took it seriously, but now it's a mainstream part of everything. Certainly for me as an agency leader, I certainly see that a significant part of the value that we bring is fresh eyes, is an understanding of outbound process, the ability to look at the organisation outside in rather than inside out, and we hope loads of relevant industry experience. That's where our value lies, and I'd be wrong if I felt that therefore meant that we were relevant for every single type of customer, because there's customers for whom an in-house team is appropriate. But happily for me, there's enough of a market for those who need that agency specialism that we continue to do well. But those are the ingredients I feel that a good agency should bring to an in-house team.
So in-house versus the agencies.
I think it's the balance, I suppose, and the importance. I'm fully sold on the importance of, and having gone from in-house for 20 years to agency, I'm now even more sold on why agencies are important. But
no, it's a funny one, isn't it? In that there are some things where, and some company cultures just love having bums on seats, and so you can get them to do things that you're not paying them to do, like shift those boxes and do this, which I always find a bit of a weird thing. But I think the bit to me is about you bringing outside experience when it's short term. I think so in web design, for example, there's been a move like 15, 20 years ago. Everyone just outsourced web design, or you might have had someone in-house who could click a few buttons and keep things going for you. But then you started to see, as web grew as a channel and strategically important to organisations, big supermarkets all at one point outsourced their web build, and now I think they all have it. They all have huge web development teams in-house working on things all the time, because it became more strategically important, so they had to insource it rather than outsourcing it because it was mission critical. So I think there's a bit where, as it becomes critical to the mission, you need to maybe have a little bit more control and ownership of it, and maybe as you use it more frequently, you maybe need to look at, should we bring it in, because it becomes a financial consideration. But regardless to that, I think sometimes the sets of skills, and I'm looking at myself here and going, oh, again, this is my sales pitch, which it's not, but there are sets of skills that you need to bring in sometimes just to have that fresh eyes. I mean, that everywhere I go consulting, often a lot of the things I present back are things that someone in their marketing team said to me. And I'll flag it and go, oh, Gareth said we should look at doing this, and this is one of the things, and here's why we should be doing that. And you'll come away from it, the board will buy into it, and they've said, we've been saying this for years, but they just don't listen. And I have no idea why. They pay you money to come in and tell them things their team's telling them anyway, but they listen to you because you're the outside guy. I wish I knew why that was a thing, but it is. It genuinely is. It's strange.
It is. And I mean, it was actually a part of Ritson's article about the tailwind of trust, because he said once you go past, the worst possible person to try and change the board's mind about the importance of something is someone who's been in an organisation and is trying to change people's perception of what they are. Because you get pigeonholed. This is why people move, because you get pigeonholed as this is what this person is, this is what this person does, this is the value they contribute, and you try and step outside the lines of the box, and people just are deaf to it. Whereas somebody external coming in, even if it is feeding back something that internal person has said, it's, oh, you're credible now because you're sending us an invoice. Yeah. So we have to listen.
Maybe they have to listen to you because they're paying you, and they can see it, and it sits there to be signed off. So.
No, it's a really good observation, Peter, that the quality or impact of what someone says is completely wrapped up in how they are perceived internally. I can see that dynamic. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much, gents. I hope everybody watching found that useful. Next month, we're back to a specific sector focus where we're going to have a look at the arts sector and marketing rules in the arts sector. So given the time that sector's had over the last 18 months, I'm sure there'll be a few war stories to be told and hopefully a little bit of optimism as we move forward. Okay, so thanks everybody for joining us.